Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the Butterfly Garden Workshop. This is the first in a series of workshops in a project for Omni to sort of transform the yard, the Omni grounds, into a more sustainable native landscape. So there'll be a series of things coming out as we go along. So stay tuned about that. But I want to thank the Arkansas Master Naturalists for donating plants, and also White River Nursery, who gave us the plants that we're going to use today. So thanks to those folks. I'm Michael Cockrum. I'm on the Omni Board of Directors. I want to thank our presenters today, Don and Jane Steinkraus.
Yay!
Don, I first got to know who Don was from his interviews on the local NPR station, KUAF. Just these really wonderful talks about insect life and that sort of thing. And Don and Jane are in the process of converting land that they own to a native prairie and native woodlands. So they're both very familiar with native plants. So I'll just turn it over to you guys. And
okay, thank you. Okay. Well, I'm Don Steinkraus. I'm a professor of entomology at the university. Been there 30 plus years. Been an entomologist since I was 5 years old. So really have been. But doesn't mean I know that much. And this is my wife Jane, and we're partners in trying to restore our property as much as we can to native plants. And I commend Omni for trying to restore some of their property to native plants and insect habitat. And this is always one of the first things I ever want to share with people is my friend Doug Calamy's book, Bringing Nature Home. Really, he is doing great things. He's an entomologist, but he has studied why native plants are critical to bird life. We have some birders in the audience here. I know we do. A bunch of them. Well, birds are utterly dependent. Almost all our terrestrial birds are utterly dependent on caterpillars to feed their young right now. And if they can't find caterpillars and they can't find moths to eat, they're doomed. And so he documents the importance of native plants. And you want to say something else? Go ahead.
Well, just want to say that caterpillars have evolved with our native plants. So
Yeah.
even though there's privet over there, there are no caterpillars feeding on it, or no caterpillars feeding on bush honeysuckle. They need the native plants as their sole foods, really.
Yeah.
For the larvae.
Yeah, it seems to me that actually the reason the nurseries brought over so many exotic plants was because they had no, what they call pests, meaning there were no caterpillars that got on nandina or on privet or bush honeysuckle. So they thought, these are great plants for their homeowner because there's nothing that's going to attack them. And that's one reason why a lot of our exotic plants are so invasive. Well, I can show you a couple things. It's kind of hard when it's cold and windy to bring these out. I don't actually collect and pin insects anymore. When I was younger, I did, which most entomologists still do, but I don't believe in it anymore. When you take a digital picture, you just take a digital picture. But these are all native insects, except for there's some oriental silkworms down below. And each of these has a host plant that it will eat as a larva. Or a set of host plants, but without those host plants, they can't survive. So I'll do another book here, which is absolutely top-notch. This is by David Wagner at University of Connecticut. Great book. Not expensive. Caterpillars of the eastern U.S. Believe it or not, caterpillars are just as pretty as any butterfly or moth. And they're just as distinct. You can identify almost every species of moth or butterfly in the U.S. from its caterpillar. But he also tells what the host plants they eat are. You can search a plant by host plant, a caterpillar you find by host plant or by looking through the pictures and trying to figure out what you got. But so this is a very helpful book because it tells you what each of these insects is going to be feeding on. Yeah. So when you look at these, I mean, most people know this butterfly here is Donna. Yay. The first A in the class. Oh yeah. Anyway, monarchs are 100% dependent on Asclepias, the genus Asclepias. The milkweeds, no milkweeds, no monarchs. It's a one-to-one relationship, and everybody should be planting milkweeds like crazy because the area of milkweeds has gone down dramatically in the U.S. and the monarch populations are sort of at risk.
And we're right on their migration route. So Arkansas is an important state to have a lot of milkweed.
Yeah, that actually points out something. You know, like the name you give something is important. Calling milkweeds weeds has made people think they're weeds. They're not weeds. They're wildflowers. And there's a whole bunch of species that occur in Arkansas. And they're all beautiful. And the monarchs, if you plant milkweeds, you usually will get monarch larvae on your milkweeds. And their life cycle is just fantastically wonderful. Okay, so Donna's got an A. Okay, now here's a little pretty butterfly here, this dark one with shiny hind wings. Can anybody tell me what that is? This one here, shiny bluish wings. Yeah? It's a swallowtail. That's its group. But what swallowtail? Actually, I almost made a mistake here myself. This is the pipevine swallowtail. This one is an interesting insect because it is the one which black swallowtails and dark-formed tiger swallowtails and spicebush swallowtails imitate. Because this one is toxic to birds. If a bird eats this one, it will throw up and not feel well because it sequesters chemicals from Aristolochia plants. And that's our native pipevine. And it's the most cool plant. I don't have it with us here. It makes a flower that looks just like a little Dutchman's pipe. That's why they call it Dutchman's pipe. So that's one I'd recommend Omni plant. You talked about making an arch. I would say plant Dutchman's pipe. If you plant Dutchman's pipe, you'll get this butterfly, almost for sure.
But make sure it's the native, because there are non-native Aristolochias that some of the nurseries sell. So you have to question them closely.
So we almost had an A on this one. Swallowtail. It's a swallowtail for sure. But my point is this one only eats one host plant in the world, really, Aristolochias. And the plants are cool, but you don't see them. If you walk around this neighborhood, I bet you we couldn't find an Aristolochia if we tried. So, see, this link between the butterflies and moths and these host plants, it's very, very tight. Because this one won't eat milkweed, that one won't eat pipevine. But that brings another point to this little discussion. So here's two noctuids. These are underwing moths. They're ones which flash their wings to defend themselves against birds. And these are major food sources for bats. Okay, now another little quiz. Kelly, name some birds which are almost totally insectivorous that we occur around here.
Well, there's quite a few. Certainly the nightjars.
Absolutely
Very
correct. Well done. Well done. Keep going.
There's lots of others. Mockingbird.
No.
Insectivore in the summertime.
Well, I'm talking about really tight.
Really tight with the insects.
Flycatchers.
Yeah.
What's that?
Flycatchers?
Flycatchers?
Purple martins. Purple martins, all the swallows. The swifts. The swifts eat really nothing but insects. And you're right, nighthawks and nightjars and things. These noctuids are one of the mainstays for bats and all of those insectivorous flying birds. And those birds are having trouble because there's not as many moths as there used to be in the world. Anybody have a clue, besides plants, why moths aren't as common?
Poison.
Poisons is one.
Yes.
You're doing well. What? Well, our night lights. I mean, there's a whole body of study on everybody's putting lights up everywhere. The lights attract the moths. The moths don't find their mates. They don't go lay their eggs. But there's actually great evidence that moth populations are declining. When moth populations decline, so will all those bird
And
populations.
bats. Yeah.
So if we want those birds, we got to have native plants to produce the caterpillars that produce the moths. And the caterpillars are food for
Actually,
little
genetic
ones.
engineering in monocultures, isn't that playing a big role too
Yeah,
in the moths?
monocultures for sure. You want to show some plants to people, Jane?
Okay, well we brought some bad plants and some good plants, and I guess maybe I'll start with the bad plants because we see a lot of them around. Does anybody know what that plant that's growing over there is, or privet? Okay, so privet. You know, it's funny, if you go to England, privet hedges actually look really nice. They don't get so big, they seem really well contained, but in Arkansas, they grow enormous, they take over, and they produce a lot of fruit that's not actually terribly high quality. I mean, it doesn't have the nutritional value of some other fruits like, say, hollies, but in lots of places, that's almost the only thing birds can eat, and then they distribute the seeds, and privet comes up everywhere. So that's a really good thing to take out of your yard if you have it.
Yeah.
How about, does this look
Nandina.
Nandina, okay. Another non-native, it does have pretty berries, but it's kind of a messy looking plant, I think. And it actually has cyanide in
All
its
parts of
berries. Yeah. So it can be harmful to birds. I mean, we found a dead cedar waxwing in our backyard that had had these berries in it.
Yeah.
So,
what happens is the landscape is so covered up right now with bush honeysuckle, nandina, privet. The birds that are overwintering can't. They have to eat something. So then they see a red berry, and a cedar waxwing will fill its crop up with nandina berries, and they'll get a toxic dose of it and die. And so, really, I have very strong opinions about these things. But in my opinion, every nandina in Arkansas should be destroyed. Every single one, every privet, every bush honeysuckle.
bush honeysuckle, I'm sure you all know this one. You can't miss seeing it. But another thing that a lot of these plants do is they leaf out very, very early. So they shade the ground. So almost all the beautiful spring ephemerals that you see if you go on a hike out in woods that is not infested with this, most of them really can't grow under bush honeysuckle. And it just becomes a monoculture. So that's another one we recommend. Don says kill it on site.
Yeah, that's my thing, kill on site. I wrote a brochure for the city once, and I wanted to put that in. They didn't want me to put the kill on site. And actually, you know, when you do bring this up, even among gardeners and stuff, people will protest, say, "Oh no, I like my privet," or
Well, people will say, "I see bird nests in these." The birds have to put their nests somewhere, and these are just ubiquitous. So,
yeah.
but you never see a caterpillar on them.
Yeah, you
start looking. You
Yeah,
never
I do look, and I also, as a beekeeper, I always look to see what bees are on the flowers. And now I have seen a bee on a privet flower, and I have seen them on this, but it's not like they're wanting to go to it. It's a kind of a rare event. So they're not good for pollinators, not good for caterpillars. The berries are not very nutritious for birds.
I think, Kelly, you gave us a really interesting article that had the nutritional content of various berries. Does that ring a bell? Anyway, both privet and bush honeysuckle, even though they make a lot of berries, it's sort of a little bit like junk food. They're not super packed with nutrition. Yeah. Okay, how about this one? You'll often see this growing up trees. Euonymus, right, euonymus, and it's getting ready to bloom. Another one that actually can harm big trees by sort of strangulation and competition for resources, and it is really starting to invade the landscape. It's really bad in cities, but it's reaching out. Don and I have noticed on our property, which we've had 11 years now, that every year we're having to pull up more euonymus. Because again, the birds are having to eat berries, they're having to eat fruits. If there's not good stuff, they'll eat stuff like this, and then spread it. So that's another one. It's hard to get rid of once it grows up a tree, but
Does that have a common name?
euonymus. I don't know of any other names. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know.
either.
All right, and then this is a ground cover. Yeah, it's a vinca. There's two. There's a smaller vinca and a larger vinca. Another thing that's just invasive and isn't really, and we are super guilty. Our front bed, we pull vinca out all the time and it comes back all the time. So it's hard to get rid of, but it's good to fight, or at least don't introduce it to your yard.
Yeah. So one of the things you can do if you just walk around Fayetteville or even out in the woods anymore, when we go to the Buffalo River, we see so many invasive plants in weird places you wouldn't think they'd be, but they're not producing the caterpillars for the birds, and they're not really supporting our ecosystem. And one of my analogies is we need an army of people to be working against these things, and it's actually very few. So I really commend you,
Yes.
you all, for trying
Doing great.
to provide some habitat for butterflies and moths and
I forgot
birds.
one, too. Anybody? Yeah, English ivy. So English ivy's kind of, I mean, it's actually beautiful, but it's also harmful in this environment. And one thing about euonymus and English ivy is when they're running along the ground, they tend not to fruit. They have to kind of raise themselves up where they get more sunlight. So if you can keep them, even if you can't get rid of them, if you can keep them from growing up the trees, you'll keep them from fruiting. Okay, you want to do the good stuff?
Well, maybe, sure. I mean, well, okay, so this one is a really important little plant. I just cut this down in our backyard, this one. Anybody got an idea?
Let me pass it around so they can see the flower.
The fruit. Pawpaw.
Pawpaw.
Yeah, so no, pawpaw is a native plant to the Ozarks. It's edible. How many of you ever eaten a pawpaw? You like them?
Yeah.
Really? Stephen Marquardt takes us on secret pawpaw searches.
Oh, good. Yes, good.
Replacing red for
Yeah, that's excellent.
That's the way to
well
go.
done. Well done.
Well, it's an interesting plant. You know, we're talking about insects a little bit. Those liver-colored flowers are beetle and fly pollinated, and they aren't pollinated by butterflies or anything like that, particular bees. Also, pawpaw has to be cross-pollinated, or has to have, it can't self-pollinate itself, and so you have to have two different varieties of pawpaw to get fruit. That's what they say anyway. Plus, you have to have the beetles and flies to carry the pollen. But one of the really beautiful things about pawpaw is it's the only host plant for our native zebra swallowtail. And I don't have a zebra swallowtail with me, but they're one of the most beautiful of our native swallowtails. And its caterpillars feed only on pawpaw. And so right now, the zebra swallowtails are out flying around and laying eggs on the young pawpaw leaves. And a great butterfly, and it's a great plant, but you don't see a lot of them in Fayetteville. There are some, but you don't see a lot. So increasing the numbers of these things is helpful to the butterflies. Yeah.
Eggs on my pawpaws last year, but I kept watching them and then they disappeared. Is there a lot of predation on the eggs?
Well, there's parasites, parasitic wasps, there's little tiny wasps which lay their eggs in little tiny butterfly eggs. And so there's wasp, and then, or they might have hatched and the larva got eaten by something.
Well, sometimes caterpillars eat their own eggs after they eat the remains
the shell.
after they hatch out. Never saw.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's not that unusual. Birds are. I don't know if birds like zebra swallowtail larvae. I don't know one way or the other really, but birds are searching constantly, and that's caterpillars have evolved all kinds of defenses to hide out from birds, because birds are looking for them. And if you ever watch like a wren or a nesting bird, a bluebird, they are making hundreds of trips a day coming back with caterpillars.
Yeah. But the property that we have in West Fork has a lot of pawpaws on it, and we see hundreds of zebra swallowtails. So it's really, it really does make a difference. If you've got them, you'll have.
Isn't that a pretty little thing?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
They're very cool.
Exceptional.
Yeah, well worth planting. They're semi-tropical plant, really. I mean, they got great big leaves. They really are. They look semi-tropical, and they're kind of a pleasant, interesting, cool
But they
thing.
did fine through the big freeze this year, so.
Yeah. In fact, okay.
Okay.
Well, maybe you want to tell them about this one.
Okay.
This was a good one for you guys to plant here too. So you've got pawpaw coming. This would be good.
Okay, this is a kind of nice native shrub because it also can take at least half shade. I don't know. So this is a plant that is already bloomed and is forming its fruits. So it has fruits early in the year, which is quite unusual. And robins, all kinds of mockingbirds, they just love these. Anybody know what this is? It kind of, the leaves look a little bit like poison ivy.
They look
They're in
just like
threes.
poison ivy, to tell you the truth. If you just see the leaves, you'd think it's poison ivy.
Yeah. It blooms little yellow flowers and then it makes red fruits. And it's interesting, Don and I sometimes eat them and they're almost a little bit salty. They're really unusual
and they're really
tasting.
early in the summer, and the birds come and just eat them all up.
So this is called fragrant sumac. I always want to say aromatic, but it's fragrant sumac. It's a much more low-growing sumac than most of the ones that you see elsewhere. It has really pretty yellow flowers early in the year,
Yeah.
small yellow flowers, and it makes these fruits that the birds just go nuts over at a time when there's not a lot of fruits around.
It'd be good for like
So
this border
it'd be-
here.
That's what I was thinking.
on a
Along,
property
like
line,
under those
'cause
trees,
it stays
it would
about
be great.
this tall.
Yeah, we
And
have a
it's
bunch in our
also-
front yard. We can show you
it
that
does
it's a great
really-
plant.
really a
Where
good
do you
job.
get those? Is there any place locally that
You know,
sells-
who was telling me that they got something from the Missouri Conservation? Yeah, they sell fragrant sumac. You can, yeah.
It spreads too. I mean, it'll thrive.
Yeah, they
But
do
like,
really,
so it's good
really
for birds
well.
and the bees, the solitary native bees, which you may not realize. Everybody knows about the honeybee. There's one honeybee species in North America, and that's Apis mellifera. Came originally from Europe. Before that, it probably came from Asia. There's African versions, but it was brought over by colonists. But there's 1,000 species of native bees in Arkansas, 4,000 species in North America, and 20,000 in the world. And most people don't know much about the native bees, but the native bees are extremely important pollinators of our native plants. And this plant, in the spring in our front yard and near Wilson Park, is covered with native bees that come out to feed on the pollen.
Yeah.
So it's a good bee. This is what I call multi-eco. It's serving multiple ecological purposes. It's feeding bees. It's feeding birds. I haven't seen caterpillars on this, but there probably are some. So it has purposes in the ecosystem.
Don, we're going to have a native bee workshop.
Are you?
All right, good.
Good. This is another one that's just a perfect thing to plant in anybody's yard in replacement for all these invasive things. And this is our flowering dogwood. I mean, it's the most elegant, beautiful plant imaginable, and yet people are letting their yards grow up into all this junky stuff. And this also goes really good with redbud, which I see you have a couple redbuds here.
Yeah.
And there are caterpillars that eat on this, and there are bees will come to it,
And the fruits are really, really packed with nutrients.
the
Like,
birds love the
them.
fruits of these.
Yeah.
Well, has anybody got any questions at the moment that are burning that they'd like to ask? Yeah.
Mayapple? Is that a good thing
Yeah.
to have? I love mayapple.
That's a good thing to have.
I love Mayaples too. They belong here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turtles, isn't there some relationship between
Box
them and
turtles
turtles?
supposedly eat the fruits and spread the seeds. Apparently they're important in spreading the seeds. For each of these plants, you have to study them, and you can find out all kinds of unusual things. So I've never really looked to see if what's coming to a mayapple flower to pollinate it. You have to, each plant has its own strategy. Yeah.
Where's the best place to plant soil-wise?
I think it can stand some shade for sure.
Yeah.
And it can stand full sun. I would say, you got a lot of areas here where there's not much going on, and I hope I'm right. I think you still have a Bradford pear down there in the corner. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah, on this corner here, there's two or three of them.
It's what is it?
It's supposed to be a regular pear.
Oh, is it?
It's only got 3 flowers.
I see.
Huh.
Well, I know there's a lot of Bradford pears across the street. You know, just in my mind, get a chainsaw, take them down, plant a pawpaw. The sooner you begin, the sooner you
it's
have
all
a
good.
replacement. You know, it's not going to help if you wait 10 years to take down a bad tree. In that time, a pawpaw would grow to be a nice tree. So I've taken down lots of Bradford pears and bush honeysuckles, yeah.
Can you clarify about the pawpaw you were talking about, like planting different varieties? Like, how does that work to make sure they pollinate?
Well, it's just like with apples. If you want an apple to produce an apple, you have to have a different variety so it gets cross-pollinated. They're self-infertile. So if you don't have two varieties of apples and then have bees carrying the pollen from the two varieties back and forth, they won't set fruit.
But
So we have a lot of pawpaws on our land. I never see fruit on them. So I'm thinking it's all clonal, and we need to get some other varieties out there. Then you also have to have beetles and flies. Some people hang dead roadkill in their pawpaw trees, truthfully, to attract flies and beetles, so that they'll come and pollinate their pawpaws. If you don't have pollination, for instance, actually I want to show you a plant. This is our native hazelnut, and you all probably have had hazelnuts at one time or another, right? There's commercial hazelnuts, and they grow a lot of them in Turkey, and they grow a lot of them in Oregon. But this is our native one, and the squirrels and things really like this plant. And it produces both male and female flowers, but they're separate. So the females are little tiny cute red flowers, and the males have catkins and produce lots of wind pollination. But ours has never produced any nuts. So everybody's learning. So I looked it up. I thought, well, what's going on? How come we never get any nuts? And then I realized it's sort of like apples. You have to have a different variety of the hazelnut to pollinate the female flowers, and they won't be pollinated by their own male flowers. So these little things like that are important to know. If you want nuts, fruits, and things, you have to sometimes have two varieties.
Okay.
So anyway, this is also a nice shrub to put out.
hazelnut, although
yeah.
you have to be prepared for it to spread. It sort of forms thickets.
We're going to need a border, all the way down.
Yeah, it'd be great in there. Actually, so many of these things would be.
I got to show them the most important one. Okay, this is one of my all-time favorite plants. This is American holly,
It is beautiful.
and our neighbor has a big one. And in the wintertime, that thing is covered with robins and cedar waxwings and mockingbirds. I don't know all the birds. Big flocks come into it, and they eat every fruit on that plant. It's big, it's extremely beautiful, and it's evergreen. And so they've come up naturally in our yard. It flowers. It's also male-female. That's another thing about it. The female plants will produce berries. The males will produce pollen. So if you want berries, you got to have a male plant.
Plus a female plant.
Yeah, you have to have the two of them.
Yeah.
But this thing is evergreen, makes a fantastic border because it's evergreen and it'll block out your neighbors when you don't want to see them. But a lot of people want that. They want a screen. This makes a fantastic screen, but the bees love the flowers. The birds love the berries. It's like
It's also good. It's a good shelter plant in bad weather.
it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have one on your property?
No,
It's protective.
little ones.
Anyway, it's a terrific plant, but it's not planted that much. I'm always wondering, why aren't people planting these things? So I'm trying to, when everyone comes up our yard, I try to dig it up and move it to our land, and then, hopefully in
We love
50
them.
years it'll be feeding birds. One of them will. But so this is all around great plant for insects and birds and people.
No,
I don't think, no, it does grow in deep
they
woods.
grow in the woods. I mean, it would be nice for it to have half sun at least, and it can take full sun.
Yeah, in full
But
sun.
they can grow in a deep shade too.
Look around town. There are some here and there. There's, like I say, our neighbor on Vandeventer has a great big one. It's like a big pyramid. It's tall, 30 feet tall, and it's dense with leaves and.
They grow into trees, basically.
Yeah, they're big trees,
Yeah,
right?
they're
they're
actually
big
very
trees.
important in art a long time ago. A lot of them were cut, I guess, because they have very dense wood to make wood cuts and things, and wood parts. But so, every nursery should be selling these things like crazy, because the birds need them. I think this winter when it was so cold, a lot of birds starved to death, plus froze to death. I think that, if you don't have the energy source and it's freezing cold, you're in trouble.
Should I do this one?
Yeah, sure.
So it looks like y'all have planted a witch hazel. A witch hazel is another understory tree or shrub that we really love. It's one of the earliest blooming. This is the vernalis, which I think that one is too. So very, very early spring blooming, maybe late January, something like that, into February. Super delicious, sweet fragrance. And we're always amazed that early in the year that you see it covered with these little native bees and insects. So they're looking, they're needing stuff. And this, like Don and I really like plants that bloom super early in the season and super late in the season because they're just so needed. There's a lot of things that bloom in the height of the summer, but it's nice to have things at either end of the season. And witch hazel and the fragrant sumac both are good early bloomers. And you've already got a bunch of asters, which are good late bloomers.
So I just want to show you why this book is good. I just looked up witch hazel, and there's like 20 pages of caterpillars that eat witch hazel, among which, for instance, the striped hair streak. All the hair streaks are beautiful little butterflies. They're gorgeous little things. And the striped hair streak, one of its host plants, is witch hazel. So, you're doing a lot of good for nature if you plant these things. And
hey, Don, you look up this one, fragrant sumac. Oh, you want me to?
yeah, sure,
I'll do
you
it.
can.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of that, this, I don't know how many of you have seen, this is the latest book by some of our local authors, Jennifer Ogle,
it's
Theo
a
Witzel.
great book.
Johnny Gentry wrote a book on
Great
the
book.
woody trees and shrubs and vines of Arkansas. This thing is a delight. It's a fantastic book. You can identify things. It also has the invasive plants in there, but it'll tell you what's native, and these books are great assets. I want to point out another book that we like. This is co-authored by Doug Talamy, who wrote Bringing Nature Home, but Rick Dark is also an author. It's called The Living Landscape. Rick Dark managed one of the biggest botanical gardens in the U.S. at Longwood Gardens up in Pennsylvania, and we went to see him speak here one time. He came to speak to Springdale's garden group. He spoke like for 6 hours, and we were on the edge of our seats the whole time.
We listened to every word.
I mean, I've never
amazing.
gone to hear somebody speak that I could listen to for 6 hours.
And in fact, we had lunch with him too. We were so lucky. We got to listen to him for 6 hours, plus eat a meal with him.
But anyway, I recommend this book, especially for like you guys, if you're trying to restore this to like that kind of thing, because this tells how to do it. It talks about the importance of layers, having trees, shrubs, annual plants, perennial flowers, and how to minimize lawn. Having some lawn is fine, but minimize it. This book is great, and both Rick Dark and Doug Talamy have walked the walk. Doug Talamy transformed his property, just like he says in these books, and he has seen so many birds come back that he hasn't seen, and they aren't going to the neighbors' yards, which are typical suburban yards. All these birds that haven't been seen there, and moths, he sees them all. And so I don't know what to say exactly about that, but because he documents it, something he hasn't seen like in 30 years suddenly reappears because the habitat is there.
Yeah. There's just one more shrub that we didn't do.
Sure,
Can we
you
do
do
this one. This is something called ninebark. I don't know if it's got buds on it now, so it's getting ready to come into bloom. It has very pretty blooms. It forms kind of a big shrub, maybe like 8 to 10 feet tall, kind of round. Like if any of you have hiked the trail to Kings River Falls, there's a lot of ninebark along that trail. So it likes to be near water, but it doesn't have to be. Very beautiful blooms, and it forms these little nutlets that are good wildlife feed, and like birds and other wildlife like to eat in the fall. So another plant that's beautiful and provides nourishment to a variety of creatures in the landscape.
So does anybody have any questions at this point? More questions, or things you want us to cover that we haven't covered?
I got a question.
Yes.
Our front yard is a rain garden, and we got all natives in a big part of it, but then on this kind of lower part, it's all vinca.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it's really beautiful, and it just kind of covers everything down there. And do we need to pull it all out?
It's hard. We've
It's
never
hard.
succeeded. Once it gets a foothold, man, that stuff's
It's
tough.
thick down there.
What?
Oh no,
No, it's a really tough plant.
Kelly! I planted when we first moved to our house. I planted vinca. A friend gave me starts, and now I spend all my time
The
pulling.
previous owner of my house had planted vinca and English ivy, and I pulled it all up, and occasionally some will start to come back, and I just pull it. So
There's a lot of it. I mean,
well, this is maybe
a
probably.
lot.
We have never.
We could come look at it with you because there are native plants that do well in low, wet areas. Maybe you could work on an area bit by bit or something. I don't know.
Well, I'm willing to answer any questions about. I can. Yeah.
On the vinca, it looks to me like it only propagates vegetatively. Is that true?
You're what?
I couldn't-
Does the vinca only propagate vegetatively? It seems to do that a lot for sure.
Yeah, it does. I have never seen seeds. It does produce flowers, but I've never seen seeds of it. So
In a really enclosed area, it's going to be much more.
Right.
The Anchors, they have the city really pawpaw trees a couple years ago.
Good.
And I got two, so I thought, I've got it covered, but I don't know if there's two different varieties.
yeah, I don't.
We don't know either. We've had
Yeah,
there's guesswork.
until they're teenagers, huh?
You'll probably have to just wait. See, that's a logistics thing. A lot of stuff is logistics. So, like, if you have a pawpaw a mile away, that's the right variety to pollinate your pawpaw. And I could be wrong on some of this stuff too. So, but probably there's no beetle that's going to carry the pollen from a mile away to your pawpaw. So the proximity of plants is important. And people that raise apples in orchards know that proximity is important. You can't have your cross-pollination variety too far away, or not enough pollinators are going to move pollen from plant to plant. So, and that's what I mean by logistics too. Like, I mean, tell you the truth, it breaks my heart. It really does to think of the birds out there. Like, I walk up to the campus all the time, and it's wall-to-wall bush honeysuckle. Wall-to-wall. There's
bike
no
trail.
caterpillars on the Frisco Trail. And then you got these wrens and birds trying to feed their young. Well, if you have to search, acres and acres of a non-productive plant for a caterpillar, you're going to get worn out, and you're not going to find enough, and your young are going to die on a cold day like this. So it's actually a serious thing, because the logistics, a bird has to search for a caterpillar. And when I've watched wrens feeding their young, I know for a fact I couldn't find 100 caterpillars a day if I had to. They're out there searching their little hearts out. So they need plants with caterpillars. It's like really serious problem. So anything anybody can do to help the birds out and the caterpillars and the moths is doing a really, what would you call it?
A loving thing. Yeah,
a loving
you're being
thing
a good
or a
steward.
beneficial thing.
Right.
When you plant a milkweed plant, you are loving monarchs.
Right.
You are actually, I don't remember, I understand it's like, I've heard this saying, I suppose it's Yiddish, that they said during the Holocaust that if you save one human being, it's like you saved all human beings. I'm not sure I've got that quote right. But if you plant milkweeds, you'll help save monarchs. And if you plant these other things. Yeah.
One thing I want to say is that we've sort of focused on shrubs and smaller plants in this talk. Actually, the plants that provide the most services are often like oaks or, certain kinds of trees. But I just thought for this particular talk, because we're sort of thinking about what you can plant, we've stuck to smaller. But it's good to think big, too.
Oh, okay. I want to say one more thing about monarchs. Okay. So I saw my first monarch about 3 or 4 days ago, flying across our property. And these monarchs they've been flying at least 1,000 miles, maybe 2,000 miles from their wintering sites in Mexico. That's a long flight for a small animal. And they have to refuel all the time, and they refuel on nectar. So all the way from Mexico to here, they have to have flowering plants with nectar to get their fuel. And it's just like when you drive your car from here to California, if there were no gas stations or whatever, you couldn't go very far. So they have to have flowers constantly.
Early on,
and then they have to have milkweeds, and it looks like you got some milkweeds there. So they have to have fuel, which is flowers, and that's true for all the honeybees and native bees and all these butterflies. They have to have fuel, they have to have host plants. And so by planting flowers with nectar and pollen, you're also helping all the butterflies and bees.
Yeah.
And
We have areas that tend to be dominant Johnson grass.
oh wow, first things.
We have a lot of very woods areas, but if you have say a front, we've got a front area where we stop mowing, and there's some things that are starting to grow. Can we dig an area and put some fragrant sumac in there?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
fragrant sumac will probably hold its own against Johnson grass. Johnson grass is coming into town. There's a whole bunch
It's
of
bad
a whole bunch of
news.
invasive grasses too. There's a
It's a bad
Japanese stilt grass is a new one coming in. Really a bad plant because it grows in shade. It'll cover up all the woodland flowers. Johnson grass is a terribly tough one, but fragrant sumac will hold its own. A pawpaw would hold its own. Other good plants for everything are the native plums. They're super fragrant, beautiful plants. Produce tons of flowers, covered with butterflies and bees. There's a whole lot of buttonbush.
Buttonbush is a super one. They've planted 2 already.
Have you?
Yeah,
buttonbush
super
is
plant.
superb.
They're cool plants.
Is rose campion?
That's non-native, but it's pretty.
It's not native.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was a whole bunch coming up, and we kind
It's
of moved
okay.
them around.
Yeah, just enjoy them.
Yeah, there's a lot of things which are not native that are
They're not
still
harmful.
pleasant. Like
Yeah.
bearded irises. I like bearded irises. You don't see them in the Buffalo River. And peonies. I love peonies.
Yeah.
You don't see them cropping up in crazy places.
But one thing that Doug Tallamy's research does say is that you can let your property have about 30% non-natives, and you're still going to be providing a lot of ecological services. But ideally, you'd have at least 70% natives. So just kind of thinking, if you love peonies, like I have my grandmother's peonies growing in my front yard. I'm not going to get rid of them, but try to balance them out with other things too.
Yeah, you have to also tolerate some mess. I guess that's one of the important features of dealing with nature, is there's some mess. So our yard, compared to our neighbor's yard, looks really messy. It does.
Well, partly
Because theirs are
they seed.
typical yards where they have chem lawn people come in and kill all the weeds and fertilize it, and then they mow it tight, and then. But our yard, on the other hand, is full of birds. We see all kinds of birds foraging in our little yard, and giant swallowtails come in, and in their yards there's nothing. So you have to tolerate some mess if you want to have nature. Nature is not like, a chem lawn.
I think also a lot of these plants, like the asters and milkweed, are beautiful plants.
Yeah.
I mean,
They are.
You can sort of, shape your yard to.
They definitely are. I mean, one thing I would recommend is if you've never gone to a prairie,
Oh yeah.
there's a number of prairie remnants around here. One of the most beautiful ones, Donna and Kelly came with us last year, is Baker Prairie, which is in Harrison, right near the high school. But closer by, there's Chesney Prairie, which is up near Salem Springs. And there's a couple really beautiful prairie remnants down near Fort Smith, Flanagan Prairie and Cherokee Prairie. And then there's also the Woolsey Wet Prairie that's very close by, just off of Broyles Road by the water treatment plant. But I super highly recommend that, because seeing them in bloom just helps you realize what a native ecosystem that's flourishing looks like. And it's mind-boggling. There's just so much bloom. Like go in May or early June, it's really, really will get you excited about native plants. Because they're gorgeous.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
really are. Those prairies are something. And people like Joe Neal document all kinds of birds at Woolsey Wet Prairie that aren't occurring anyplace else in town. But it's a struggle. I mean, I actually have to say, honestly, for you guys to do this is not it's not an instantaneous process, and you'll have your successes and failures. But it's kind of fun to fight them. I mean, one thing is like, well, no, I mean like you know, I can feel free to go out and chainsaw bush honeysuckle, and I feel like I'm doing a good thing. And so it allows me to use my chainsaw.
We will allow you.
Do you have bush honeysuckle on your property?
Got all kinds of
Yeah.
Where do you live?
crosses.
I see. Oh, that's pretty far out.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, now that's what's astounding and kind of scary is that way out in the country, there's a lot of problems.
Oh, we have a terrible. And then ailanthus. Okay, that's one of the scariest things around, that ailanthus trees.
Yeah, there's a lot of ailanthus in town.
Yes,
You've
you've
got
got
one right
you've got
there.
one right there.
A big one.
Yikes.
And there's all kinds of sprouts.
Oh, it's terrifying fighting that stuff.
Ailanthus
With
is,
the reddish tips, yeah.
it was brought into the United States and it was considered to be, they called it tree of heaven when they brought it in. So it's got a great big long pinnate leaf. And now in the East Coast they call it tree of hell. And stink tree. It also stinks. It smells like stinky popcorn. And
Worse. It smells worse than that.
it's all over England now. It's an Asian tree. It doesn't, again, ecologically it provides nothing.
But it also is allelopathic, right? It actually is toxic to other plants. So
It also seems toxic
it
to schools
forms
to
these
people.
great big colonies. It's just
I
take it out,
chainsawed
take it out.
and they say, and then my heart hurt. Apparently, it's got toxins in the sap, which can actually cause problems. Yeah.
Do you support chainsawing Devil's Walking Stick?
No, I can't.
I can. I can.
I like Devil's Walking Sticks, but
It's
they are,
pretty cool, but
No,
you don't want it everywhere.
It just cuts up.
I know.
well, then you just can contain it. But I think I'd like to have some of that.
We have two trees that are like gigantic, and then they have all these.
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
cool. Well, it's a
Those
cool
make
plant.
your footing, right? You just.
Yeah, no, those are really they
Yeah.
are scary.
They are scary.
That's why they call them Devil's Walking Stick.
I was hoping you were going to tell me we could just eradicate.
No, I would like
I
some.
would give you permission.
We differ.
Is it transplantable? Okay.
I don't know. I tried transplanting it once and I didn't have any success. But I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I'm sure it is too.
Because it seems to spread from runners
Well,
or
maybe
something.
we need to.
Yeah.
let
Do you
them-
want to talk about your plants?
Well, you guys, Jane probably. is
No,
a
you
good person to
you
do
and
that.
Jane can do that.
Yeah, this is exciting.
Hey, one of the favorites is the asters, I think, and they produce a beautiful flower, beautiful purple flower, and I guess the butterflies go crazy.
They
Monarchs,
do. They really
all
love
of them
them.
do, but
They all-
monarchs
yeah,
super
they
need
love them.
asters in the fall, in their fall migration. So they got to have flowers in the spring coming up, and then flowers in the fall going down. And our asters in our yard are covered with monarchs some years.
Yeah, it is true. Looks like you also got a couple species of coreopsis, and one thing I love about having coreopsis in our front yard is that when they start making seeds, they kind of bloom for a long time, make seeds for a long time, and goldfinches love the seeds. So there's always goldfinches in the front yard eating coreopsis seeds, and that's one of the joys of having them around. Plus, they're a good pollinator plant. So looks like we got a bunch of the butterfly milkweed, and it's a beautiful one. One thing I would say, I mean, this was the only, I think, milkweed that they had available
At the
at White
time.
River, but it is nice if eventually you can try to have a bunch of different species, because some species emerge earlier than others. So right now out on our property, the purple milkweed is coming up, and the viridis, Asclepias viridis, which is the antelope horn milkweed, is coming up. So for these early monarchs, those are what they're going to find. And there is one woodland Asclepias, which is called quadrifolia, and that's another very early one. So it's nice to have a diversity of them, just so there's something for the monarchs when they come.
I gotta interject something here. I know a girl in town that has a ball museum. You probably won't believe this, but she collects balls, all sorts of little spheres. But this actually relates to this. We haven't succeeded, but we have 3 or 4 milkweed species on our property. And I would like to have all the species. I think that'd be a good thing, to try here. Just say, like, we have an example of all the species which occur in Arkansas. And there's lots of different goldenrod species, all beautiful. So you could have, like, so for me, if we could have a little museum in our property of the milkweed species, it'd be fun.
Yeah.
You know, because and you would not believe that purple milkweeds are gorgeous, and swamp milkweeds are fantastically beautiful. And so
we could have a separate section for.
but you know, I mean, you could just sort of have, it's like a little demonstration thing, and you say, well, these are the different, because most people think most people don't even know there are asclepias, honestly.
So we got some of these low-growing, like I was thinking along the very front of the border. These are rose verbenas. They're just a really pretty, long-blooming, low-growing plant for the front of a bed. I think they're biennial, but they reseed. Yeah, they're not a perennial. I think you're right about that. Yeah, they usually reseed. And then we also got catmint nepeta, which is just a really beautiful, long blooming, forms mounds, and it's a very pollinator friendly flower. I don't know if those are host plants for anything, but they're a good pollinator plant.
Most of the plants are full sun or partial shade. This is the only one that's the sweet woodruff, I think, is the only one that's prefers shade. So
Right.
that'll probably go over
the
under the tree a little bit.
Oh, that's right. Lobelias.
Lobelia,
All
yeah.
right. So lobelia is another plant that does like moisture, which is true of buttonbushes too, but I think they're going to be fine there. It's possible if you had a really, really dry summer, you might want to water them a little bit. But this is also called cardinal flower, tall, red blooming, gorgeous plant. Yeah, a gorgeous native plant. And then the goras are also native plants, these that sort of, and it looks like there's also some more bee balms maybe. Just Gora, G-A-U-R-A. Let me, yeah, G-A-U-R-A. And it looks like this is sort of a variety that stays lower. Like the ones that just grow wild often can be really tall. So this is kind of going to be a little bit more modest in size.
Okay, any more questions?
It's your chance. What do you want to know about bugs? One last chance.
Margaret has a question.
Okay.
I have an inverted telescope with tons of leaves. I'm always wondering, when is the best time to get the leaves out of the perennial bulbs and stuff like that? In terms of what the insects need, what needs to overleaf.
Well, it's a problem. You know, there's no easy answer to that. You know, like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the last few years, it just seems like everybody in Fayetteville is hiring a lawn crew to come in and blow all the leaves up, and then they put them in the lawn bags and take them down to the city mulch and compost facility. Well, there goes, for instance, Luna moths, which a lot of people like a Luna moth. Luna moths like to eat things like walnut. I think you have a walnut right here.
Yeah, beautiful.
Walnut's one of their host plants, and hickories are, but they spin a very loose cocoon at the bottom of the trees and the leaves, not up in the tree, and that cocoon has to overwinter. Well, if someone comes along with a big old leaf blower and blows all the leaves up and puts them on a lawn bag, there goes all the Luna moth cocoons in Fayetteville. So it's a dilemma, but on the other hand, it's hard to have too many thick leaves everywhere in your yard. So ideally, you could rake your leaves into an area where you don't care if they're there, and then the moths would still survive. And also,
but I would say leave the leaves through the winter, because there's.
yeah, but these moths are going. The lunas are starting
No,
to
I
emerge
know.
now.
I know. I'm just trying to think in terms of her flower beds. I mean, it kind of is somewhat
Well, you
protective.
could try to rake them into another area
Yeah.
and just leave them. And I think the lunas, if they're cocoons, even if they're buried by a couple feet of leaves, would make their way through. But you know, these things all have to have their place to hang out, and so their caterpillars are up on the walnut or on a hickory. The cocoon is on the ground and has to survive the winter and then come out. And so our choices in how we handle all of our lawns, and things like monarchs, they make their pupa hanging from a plant or something like that, and it hangs there. So some people have these very clean yards where when they clean up, there's no place for the pupa to hang and survive. So some messiness is real important for wildlife.
Yeah, yay.
But the chemlon thing is really crazy. And
If you want to go outside, have some more conversation, bring some of the lemonade I made.
oh, sure. That sounds good.
Sounds good. Yeah, it is getting chilly, isn't
Okay.
it? It seems like
You're
it's
welcome
almost
to
getting
look at the
cooler.
plants.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm really proud of you for trying to do
Yeah,
this.
it's great.
Super proud.
Thank you for doing it.
Because it's work.
I started raking leaves.
So we're going to take a quick look at the butterfly garden bed. We started this bed last summer by putting down cardboard, then a layer of mulch. So over that period, it's given some time for the grass to die back. So as you can see, we've got the plants that we showed in the workshop. Most of those are in the ground. So let's take a closer look at the bed. We have the lower growing things out front, and then milkweed, some coreopsis over here with the yellow flowers, lobelia there, the reddish colored plant growing up, and a lot of asters. Butterflies love the asters. Nice purple flowers and late fall blooming, and we'll be filling in areas, but we have a number of bushes at the back, witch hazel, a couple of button bush, which are great for butterflies, and they're just kind of cool looking plants.